Welcome to the Digital Literacy Network module about Genius Hour and Passion Projects. This is another innovative way to enhance student engagement in your classroom. So let's take a look at how you can implement Genius Hour and Passion Projects in your classroom. So let's discuss why you might want to try Genius Hour or Passion Projects in your class. Daniel Pink introduced a book called Drive, and he provided a fantastic TED Talk also on the same subject. And one of the things that he talks about is what drives intrinsic motivation. And the three things that he suggests are part of that drive are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So there's a wonderful video that animates his TED Talk and discusses those elements of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And introducing a project like a passion project or a Genius Hour activity or a 20% time project, when those are done effectively, they really support those pieces of intrinsic motivation of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. As well, all of these sorts of projects tend to be inquiry-based learning activities. So Sylvia Duckworth has created a beautiful sketch note about some of the elements that you might want to look at for using inquiry-based learning, such as nurturing the student passions and talents, really building on their personal interests, allowing that student agency of voice and choice, increasing their engagement, fostering curiosity, teaching grit and perseverance, because a project is not an easy thing to take on. And sometimes they get kind of stuck. And that's okay. We want to encourage them to keep going, to work through it, to look at ways to do it slightly differently, whatever it takes for them to persevere. We want to enhance that growth mindset. And eventually, we want to create and help develop the problem solvers of tomorrow. So whether they're doing a passion project in a grade 3 class, or whether they're doing a full 20% time project in a grade 10 class or a grade 11 class, the process can be the same. And we are teaching students to look at questions and solve problems. It also ties in with the creative process. And if you're looking at this in Ontario, if you have access to one of the Ontario Arts Curriculum documents, the creative process is explained very, very well in the front matter of any arts document. And that creative process embraces the same elements that engaging in a passion project will do. So what makes Genius Hour and passion projects unique? These are not just free time activities. That's part of the key when you're introducing a passion project or a Genius Hour to your students for the first time. You want to make it clear to your students that this is not going to be just a play time, free time period in their class or in their week, that although you're going to allow them to choose and focus their own topic idea, they will be monitored and guided throughout the process. So you want to encourage student agency, but you want to perhaps connect to some real world problems. Whether those problems are something within their own classroom, whether those are in the broader global perspective, connecting with others can be a very important part of a passion project. Working through the process and working through the guiding and monitoring levels of the activity are also crucial to making this something that becomes a very effective activity. Passion projects tend also to be shared beyond just the teacher or the classroom. As soon as students think that they are presenting to a global audience in some way, again, whether that's another class in the school, whether that's at an assembly or a community event, or whether it really is something that is out on social media and so it's connected in a more global fashion, Once that authentic audience is in place, there's a new level of drive and intensity that tends to take place, and students really want to produce their best work for that global audience. Again, it supports intrinsic motivation, and it includes reflection, and it encourages growth mindset because we're looking at the learning process as we move through the project. The final piece about passion projects is that it's okay to embrace failure because we're going to be looking more at the process than the final product. So perhaps if they decided to write and record a song, but by the end of the project, they really had only gotten through one verse and a chorus, that's okay because they probably learned some amazing skills. They probably learned about how they learn and how they work and can probably tell you their story when they do their final presentation. So it's okay that their product is not complete as long as they can tell you the process that they used to get to where they ended. So let's take a look at some of the ways you can get started. Inclusion activities are fantastic ways to get kids generating ideas while still looking at it from a playful manner. So there are all sorts of activities you could try. There's a game called Spot It, a game called Things. You can take a look at a wonderful picture book called The Most Magnificent Thing that helps them look at the sorts of skills that might help someone be successful and persevere throughout a project. You could brainstorm using something like Padlet or a Google Doc or a Google slide deck. Try and create what's called a bad idea factory. If kids are having a hard time coming up with bad ideas, or with good ideas, sorry, have them come up with supposedly bad ideas. Brainstorm some of those boring ideas. What would you not want to do as a project? And it's amazing what some of the ideas they will generate and that you can turn into an exciting project. And finally, you could look at the design thinking process and look at a rapid ideation. And this also sort of walks through the design thinking process, where they're learning to empathize with each other, with the world around them. They're thinking about their topic focus, then they're generating some more ideas, and eventually we're going to settle in and focus on one passion project idea, and then they can move to the prototyping or the research and investigation stage. So, how do we help them get focused? Starting with all kinds of questions can be very important. So, what types of questions are there? Are there basic knowledge questions? And if so, are those the ones that you want to be looking at? If the answer can be found in your very first search on Google, you might want to encourage students to look a little bit deeper and ask questions with more depth and more of those questions that are based on why or how, what impact might this have, what would this mean to somebody else, why would somebody want to know this or learn this. So using a question chart like a cue chart, a brainstorming template, any of those ideas that help them generate questions can help them narrow down what they're really going to investigate. Using something like a T-chart. If you're working in a subject-specific area, for example, music, maybe you want them generating all kinds of ideas and then look at how they might connect it to your subject area. Another great way of narrowing down ideas is to use a March Madness bracket of sorts. So instead of them having to decide one project idea out of the 8 that they generated, perhaps just have them choose between idea A and B. Which one do they like better? And then look at idea C and D, and which one do they like better? And then the winner of each of those moves ahead and is compared to something new. So choosing between 2 ideas can be much easier than choosing one from a large list. Once students have decided on their topic idea, have them create a proposal. And this can be the first piece that perhaps is handed in and evaluated. You can make it a detailed proposal if you're working with some of the senior grades, or with the junior grades, simply keep it to 4 or 5 questions, such as, what is your project idea or goal or focus? What do you actually plan to do? How do you plan to do it? What materials will you need? What are you going to show off at the end? And what are some of the steps or the deadlines that you might want to meet as you move through your project? Proposals can be very simple, or they can be more detailed depending on the age group that you're working with. So next, we want to continue helping them move forward. So this is where small group discussions can be really wonderful. Student-teacher discussions and conferences, or small groups called incubators. Of course, the idea behind an incubator is that it helps something grow and become healthier and more robust. So within those incubators, students are encouraged not to judge, but to offer suggestions and support and help as they move their project forward. So having those incubator discussions with a few guided questions perhaps every week or every 2 weeks can really help students work together and collaborate and stay on task. Sharing beyond the classroom can be incredibly important. If you'd like to look at something like Blogger, in the York region, you can set up a Blogger account with the GAPS account. So this means that it would still remain within the York region firewall. So Blogger is a great way to have students talk back and forth about their projects and journal their journey. If you're not interested in looking at Blogger at this stage in their educational career, that's fine. Perhaps posting a question on Google Classroom might be an effective way for them to discuss their journey, or creating a Google site, or simple paper and pencil and have them actually create a process journey or a process journal that continues to explain their path through their project. You could look at an online tool called Flipgrid that allows them to create video documentation of their activities. So that again might be a great way for them to talk about their project as they move ahead. And then once they've done all kinds of wonderful research, once they've had a great time learning all about their passionate idea, it's time to look at presentation options. A midpoint check-in would be great to sort of have them have to sell their idea in something like an elevator pitch. The speed dating or the inside-outside circle concept, where they're presenting only to one other person for 2 minutes, and then another person would present for 2 minutes, is also an effective way to get them to refine their presentation skills. And then, closer to the end of the activity, it's time to consider final presentation options. A lot of 20-time projects or passion projects have started to embrace the TED Talk presentation mode, which is a great way to get students away from reading off a slide. They could do a simple video. Ignite Talks are really neat talks that are 5-minute presentations, and they're 20 slides that advance every 15 seconds. And the slides are primarily images, perhaps a quote, but again, very little text. Now that might be a very big project presentation mode. 20 slides is a lot. So if you didn't want to go to the Ignite Talk route, perhaps look at something as simple as Google Slides and ask students to create 6 to 7 to 10 slides that perhaps you could time the advance for every 30 seconds. Either way, make it personal for your students. And if a student comes up with another presentation mode idea, absolutely encourage them to take that road, because after all, this is their passion project. It's important, though, that you encourage them to storyboard their presentation before they actually have to complete it. It's a great way to get students to visualize and talk themselves through their presentation sequence. Again, this could be something that you could ask them to hand in and could be part of the evaluation piece. And finally, final reflections and evaluations. At the end of the project, it's important to reflect back on what took place and the kind of journey that they went through. If you're looking for more assessments, Joy Kerr online has a website that is what's called a live binder, and there are all sorts of assessment suggestions here. If you'd like a rubric for a presentation, this was a very, very simple one. Assessing the final presentation. And again, not necessarily the product, but the preparation and the presentation of that final product is important. So tell the story. Ask students, what did they learn? What did they take away from this? How are they different now from when they began? If their project didn't turn out the way they wanted, why not? How did they handle challenges that they encountered along the way? So it's important to ask them to tell their story. You can create a more detailed rubric if you'd like, but however you want to evaluate that final piece, do keep in mind that this is something we want to encourage them to be looking at the process, not just the final product. So some additional resources that are available out there are some books by Kevin Brookhauser, Galit Zvi, and Denise Krebs, both of whom also have websites that are very valuable and provide a great deal of support. A.J. Giuliani and Trevor McKenzie have written some wonderful books about inquiry and innovation. Again, Joy Kerr's Live Binder is a great source. And if you are using social media, look for hashtags called 20Time, hashtag Genius Hour, or hashtag Passion Projects. But embracing the Passion Project idea, or the Genius Hour activity, or a 20% time project can be a great way to encourage social activism. It can be a great way to encourage creativity, collaboration, and really encouraging growth mindset. So I would encourage you to try a passion project in your classroom. And if you have any questions, by all means, reach out to the Digital Literacy Network and the DLRTs in York Region for any support along the way. Thank you very much.